McLaren's F1 title defence has started miserably, and no, we're not just talking about a disastrous double DNS in China. Yes, the fact that neither McLaren even made the start of the Chinese Grand Prix was embarrassing, but McLaren also has a big deficit to both Mercedes and Ferrari. It's already 80 points adrift of the championship leader Mercedes, with just 18 points from 2 Grand Prix and a sprint race. Points-wise, that's the worst start to a title defence in over a decade, only comparable to Red Bull in 2014, which is skewed by Daniel Ricciardo's unfortunate disqualification from second place in Melbourne. And McLaren has benefited from having a sprint race, which accounts for a third of its points. Take away that, and it's easily the worst start for a defending champion since Ferrari's pointless start to 2009. McLaren is lacking real performance to Mercedes too, despite having the same engine, but right now it's not even making the best of the car it does have. So what's gone so wrong? We'll come to why it's lacking performance versus Mercedes, but before then, we have to address the embarrassing reliability woes that are limiting McLaren, issues it's not entirely responsible for. On-track data is more valuable than ever in 2026 with the complex power units, and right now McLaren is way behind Mercedes and even has fewer racing laps completed than the vibrating Aston Martin Hondas. Yes, McLaren has way more actual on-track data because it's completed tons more laps through testing and practice, but to be more unreliable than Aston Martin in races isn't great. Reliability issues limited world champion Lando Norris in Melbourne practice, but the main reliability letdown was the usually dependable Oscar Piastri crashing before the race started, having been caught out by a strange torque increase. It was Shanghai that exposed how vulnerable this McLaren is, with Norris and Piastri struck by 2 different technical issues before the start of the race. Norris's car couldn't even leave the garage because of an electrical problem with its Mercedes power unit, while Piastri's car wouldn't fire up on the grid. Both issues centered on the same component of the engine, but according to McLaren were 2 different problems. McLaren team boss Andrea Stella called it quite exceptional and uncharacteristic that you have 2 terminal problems pretty much at the same time on the same component. McLaren will review the issue with Mercedes' high performance powertrains division as it doesn't yet fully understand the root cause. After all, in Stella's words, this is an area of the car not under McLaren's control, so it's entirely reliant on data from HPP. Right now, Mercedes believes it was just a bizarre coincidence that 2 issues with the same component occurred so closely together on the 2 McLarens. The works Mercedes team hasn't been without its own reliability issues. George Russell almost couldn't take part in Q3 in Shanghai, but it's yet to lose big chunks of points to them as McLaren has. Stella said the points lost in the championship was the biggest disappointment with the double DNS. While McLaren's car is nowhere near a match for Mercedes right now, it wants to keep itself in the hunt points-wise in case that changes. Just look at 2024, when McLaren didn't start the year with the fastest car, but banked a healthy number of points before an upgrade package at round 6 in Miami turned its car into incapable of overhauling Red Bull for the Constructors' title. It hopes to repeat its big development wins of 2023 and 2024, where it hauled itself from the back of the midfield to world champion in 18 months. That's not going to be easy to do in 2026 though. The opening 2 races of 2026 have been a rude awakening for McLaren on 2 fronts. First, there was a reality check of Melbourne qualifying, where the works Mercedes team showcased how it's optimised its engine in ways McLaren couldn't yet understand. Mercedes and its customers have identical power units as per the rules, but Melbourne exposed a big knowledge gap between engine supplier and customers in how to get the best out of these 2026 power units. What Mercedes was able to do puzzled McLaren, which was over 8/10 slower than Mercedes in qualifying and over 50 seconds behind in the Grand Prix. McLaren has worked hard to close that power unit knowledge gap, and it did edge closer to the overall pace in Shanghai because of it. It was 6/10 off in sprint qualifying on Friday, and then within half a second in Grand Prix qualifying on Saturday. So McLaren is potentially chipping away at some of that Mercedes advantage, although that was consistent with most rivals in China versus Melbourne with a more compact field. McLaren is learning quite rapidly though according to Stella, and has closed in on some of the power unit exploitation advantage held by Mercedes. These power units are extremely sensitive, and the way you program the power unit has a huge impact on output. In the words of Stella, small variations lead to big outcomes in terms of lap time. There's even great variations between drivers. Russell has been singled out for the job he's done in exploiting the Mercedes power unit over a single lap, even better than Kimi Antonelli in the same team. For the customers, a lot of work has to be done, reverse engineering why one of its drivers is quicker than the other over a lap, whereas that knowledge comes easier to the works team. It's why Stella called it not how you work in F1, as you're left reacting to things you can't simulate. McLaren still believes there's further engine exploitation gains to be made in the coming races. In fact, Oscar Piastri says he leaves every qualifying session feeling like McLaren's done a good job on maximising engine power, only to realise there's a chunk of time it didn't find. McLaren's made it clear it's not complaining about Mercedes either. It accepts that the works team has a small advantage when it comes to making bigger, immediate gains because it's one single entity. After Melbourne, McLaren believed roughly 50% of its deficit was down to inferior knowledge of how to exploit its Mercedes power unit versus the works team. Stella thinks the team is exploiting the power unit better, so the main deficit is now McLaren's chassis and the grip it gives in the corners. That was the second rude awakening for McLaren. Now the power unit knowledge gap has been partially closed, it's lacking aerodynamic efficiency and good old-fashioned downforce versus Mercedes. McLaren has started the season with a solid platform that it admits is slightly underdeveloped. Norris says the McLaren is not a car capable of fighting for a podium right now, let alone a win, something it hasn't experienced since 2023. Comparisons have inevitably been made to early 2023, by Stella, Piastri and even by us earlier in this video, but the situation facing McLaren is different now. Back then, it had fundamental design flaws that it needed to address with wholesale changes in the middle of the season and in between seasons that allowed it to take a gigantic leap up in the pecking order. It needed to go back to the drawing board then, whereas in 2026, McLaren thinks there's nothing in the car that isn't conceptually sound. It simply needs to accelerate development in order to catch Mercedes and Ferrari. There's also an element of its underdeveloped car compromising its power unit exploitation right now too. McLaren's downforce shortfall versus Mercedes has negative consequences for the amount of energy it can harvest, particularly when lacking grip at the rear through corners. The Mercedes being more planted through the corners means it can harvest more efficiently than the McLaren, which is scrambling longer for grip. One factor in the downforce shortage could be the shorter wheelbase car McLaren has opted for in 2026. That helps it move ballast around for a wider balance window, but means it has lesser floor area, so less downforce. There is a potential weight advantage with a shorter car, but rivals like Mercedes have, perhaps to McLaren's surprise, managed to offset that. It might make McLaren a decent contender at Monaco, along with Ferrari with its smaller turbo, but it's currently limited to third best in the pecking order. And if you want behind the scenes insight on how that 2026 pecking order is changing, don't forget to claim 90% off your first month of the Race Members Club, where you can get exclusive videos and podcasts. Stella expects the McLaren to be significantly improved in the coming races, with round 4 in Miami the target of improvement, given there's now going to be 5 weeks without a race. Norris thinks the new extended gap between races is a good thing for McLaren, because it gives more time to work out how to catch up, and he remains confident of fighting for podiums and even wins later in the year. McLaren is trying to develop the car as fast as possible in every single area, but its problem is, so is every other team on the grid. It's why, despite the circumstances being different, Stella hopes to replicate 2023 and outdevelop its rivals. McLaren's aero department proved itself to be the class of the field in the second half of F1's ground effect era, even showing up the Mercedes works team. But while it's the same personnel, there's no guarantee it will be able to replicate its success from the previous generation. You only need to look at how Mercedes went from world champion to third or fourth best most of the time in the last era. McLaren has taken inspiration from other cars too, which it's merging with its existing development plans. It means Suzuka will be more of a test of whether the team can bank the kind of points it couldn't in Shanghai. The real test for McLaren will then come in Miami, after it's had extra time to work things out. Then we'll find out whether it's still the market leader when it comes to in-season development, or whether its title defense bid will be facing a terminal blow.